First, make sure you enter the virtual meeting room in mute mode and click the unmute button only when speaking. Second, discussion will be held after the speakers deliver their presentation. If you have any question for the speakers during the presentation, please type your question in the Q&A along with your name and institution. Third, please fill in the attendance form that can be accessed through the link on the chat box. And fourth, it is urged to the participant to fill the questionnaire about this event. The link on the questionnaire will be available on the chat box after the presentation ended. Digital certificates for the participant will be sent only to those who filled the questionnaire within 7 working days after the webinar. It will be sent to your registered email. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to start our webinar today, I kindly invite Ambassador Misson of Japan to ASEAN, His Excellency Akira Chiba, to deliver the opening remarks. His Excellency Chiba, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Lydia-san. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome all the participants here to our webinar, Deepening Cooperation with ASEAN Toward the Realization of a Free and Open Indo-Pacific. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to Dr. Jimbo Ken and Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar, two of the world-renowned scholars from Japan and Indonesia, for joining us today. Dr. Jimbo and Dr. Dewi, your insights are always inspiring me, and I'm looking forward to having thought-provoking discussions later in the webinar. I would also like to thank Professor Dr. Ahmad Najib Burhani, who contributed to the arrangement of this webinar, and his team at BRIN for co-hosting this event. Ladies and gentlemen, the political and security dynamics around the world have been rapidly changing, and ASEAN has become more important than ever in coping with challenges we face. The invasion of Ukraine, the imminent concern of the world today, endangers the international order based on the grand principles of the rule of law, respect for sovereignty, and territorial integrity, which are enshrined in the UN Charter, as well as the ASEAN Charter and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia. It is unacceptable, and we condemn it in the strongest terms. Though geographically away from this region, it is not merely a conflict on the other side of the globe, but a clear threat to world peace, including the Indo-Pacific. When the rules-based international order is at stake, what we need is unity and cooperation in taking resolute actions against such outrages. Turning to the discussion on this region, we have witnessed that the Indo-Pacific continues to experience geopolitical and geostrategic shifts. The ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or AOIP, was born against this backdrop. Some people say ASEAN is caught in great power rivalry, but the fact is, ASEAN has already made a choice through the AOIP, which manifests their will to engage in the Indo-Pacific region in their own initiative. It is not for ASEAN to take sides. It is for external partners to choose ASEAN or not. Japan, as a long-standing partner of ASEAN, chose ahead of other countries and will always choose ASEAN. Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific shares fundamental principles with the AOIP, which upholds openness, transparency, the rule of law, inclusiveness, as well as the underlying principles of ASEAN centrality. And thus, we firmly believe that enhancing cooperation in line with the AOIP is essential to ensure peace, stability, and prosperity in our region. As the current circumstances surrounding the Indo-Pacific make the AOIP even more relevant, Japan commits to steadily implementing concrete cooperation with ASEAN, particularly in the 4 priority areas of the AOIP. Ladies and gentlemen, Japan and ASEAN will celebrate the 50th anniversary of Japan-ASEAN friendship and cooperation in 2023. It will be a great opportunity for us to not only embrace our path behind, but also to look into the future and embark on the next half century of our partnership. I hope this webinar will help you unravel the current issues surrounding the Indo-Pacific region, learn some key factors for the future development of Japan-ASEAN cooperation, and shed light on how Japan and ASEAN cooperation should evolve towards a brighter and more prosperous future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chiba. And now we also kindly invite the Acting Head of Research Center for Politics, the Institute of Social Science and Humanities, National Research and Innovation Agency, to deliver the opening speech. Dr. Atika, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. Good afternoon, His Excellency Chiba Akira, Ambassador of Mission of Japan to ASEAN. Thank you for your kind remarks. And also our distinguished speakers, Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar from the Center for Politics, and also Professor Dr. Jimbo Ken from the Faculty of Policy Management, Keio University, Japan, colleagues from Diplomatic Corps, fellow academics, and our respected participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Firstly, I regret to inform you and send apologies from our head of Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, Professor Dr. Ahmad Najib Burhani. He will not be able to give the opening remarks for today's webinar because he's still in travel outside Indonesia. But anyway, we can still begin this important webinar. I can say that the year 2022 marks the 14th anniversary of Japan-ASEAN friendship and cooperations. Next year, actually, we will celebrate 50 years of Japan and ASEAN relations. And over these decades, Japan has been one of the first ASEAN's dialogue partners. And so far, we have built a robust relationship by having mutual cooperation in the area of economic, political security, and also social cultural. High Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, Japan also has cooperated with ASEAN based on the key principles. We know that as a Fukuda Doctrine in 1977, the doctrine continues to be Japan's diplomatic principle for ASEAN. And since the 1990s, we know that Japan and ASEAN have expanded cooperation, including security cooperation. And in 2013, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited the 10 ASEAN countries, including Indonesia. And during that time, we have agreed the 5 principles of Japan's ASEAN diplomacy as another key principle for ASEAN-Japan cooperation. And recently, I think the chairman's statement of the ASEAN-Japan summit also has asserted that Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy reinforced the ASEAN-centered regional architecture. High Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, since April 2018, I think the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, LIPI, and now under the new institution, National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN, has cooperated with Misson of Japan to ASEAN to conduct the symposium on considerations about ASEAN and the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. This symposium has underlined that under the free and open Indo-Pacific, Japan will continue to support ASEAN and to ensure that ASEAN can continue to play a central role in this region. Japan and ASEAN friendship and cooperation is also essential in building the Indo-Pacific perspective. As we know that ASEAN has adopted the ASEAN Outlook of Indo-Pacific, as mentioned also by Ambassador Chiba in 2019, it is important also to discuss how actually both strategies will support each other in realizing an Indo-Pacific region that is inclusive and respecting the international law. And in the current situation, it is essential for Indonesia and Japan to deepen their cooperation under the ASEAN frameworks in order to respond to the ever-changing regional and international dynamics. Therefore, we argue that economic and political cooperation between the two countries has to be strengthened, both in bilateral and regional frameworks. High Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, as a continuation of our previous cooperation, BRIN is really enthusiastic to collaborate again with the Mission of Japan to ASEAN to conduct today's webinar on deepening the cooperation with ASEAN toward the realization of free and open Indo-Pacific. Today webinar is the second webinar following a successful discussion held last year under the title of Japan-ASEAN cooperation based on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. High Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that today's webinar will serve as a good opportunity for all of you to share and discuss insightful ideas and opinions on realization of the free and open Indo-Pacific from the distinguished intellectuals here today. I would like also to thank the distinguished speakers for their willingness to share their perspective, and thank also the moderator for handling the discussion. Moreover, I greatly appreciate the committee from both BRIN and Mission of Japan to ASEAN for preparing and managing this webinar. I do hope that we will have fruitful discussions. Importantly, I expect that we can maintain good relations between BRIN and the Mission of Japan, and look forward to other possible areas of cooperation to strengthen Japan-ASEAN relations in the future. By saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I officially open today's webinar. Thank you, and have a good discussion. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Please, Lydia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atika, for the opening speech. Before I hand over to the moderator, I would like to invite all the speakers and participants to take a group photo. Imam, please help us to take a photo. I will count to 3. Okay, Imam?
Okay.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Next screen, Mbak Dia.
Okay, next screen. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay. Last screen, Mbak Dia.
Okay, last screen. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Imam. Now we are going to listen to the exchange of views by the speakers that will be followed by a discussion. The session will be chaired by moderator Pandu Prayoga, a researcher at the Research Center for Politics, BRIN. Mr. Pandu, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Lydia. All distinguished participants, may I have your attention, please? Our webinar is about to begin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to you all. First of all, I'll expand my gratitude to His Excellency, the Ambassador Mission of Japan to ASEAN, Mr. Chiba Akira. Our distinguished speakers, Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar and Professor Ken Jimbo, PhD. The Acting Head Research Center for Politics, Dr. Atika Nur Alami. The Head Cluster of Foreign Policy and International Studies, Dr. Emilia Yusningrum. Friends and colleagues, the honorable all participants of this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Pandu Prayoga, the moderator of today's webinar. I'm very pleased to see you here and welcome all of you. This webinar is conducted by Research Center for Politics, National Research and Innovation Agency, or PRP BRIN, in conjunction with Mission of Japan to ASEAN. I will re-announce general rules of discussion. Make sure you enter the virtual meeting room in mute mode. Discussion will be held after the speakers deliver their presentation. If you have any questions for the speakers during the presentation, please type your question in the Q&A along with your name and institution. Please fill in the attendance form that can be accessed through the link on the chat box. It is urged for the participant to fill the questionnaire about this event. The link on the questionnaires will be available on the chat box and after the participation ended. Digital certificate for the participation will be sent only to those who fill the questionnaire within 7 working days after the webinar. It will be sent to your registered email. Ladies and gentlemen, Japan and ASEAN will mark 5 decades of friendship and cooperation in 2023, where Indonesia, as the chairman of ASEAN, over these decades, as one of the first ASEAN's dialogue partners, Japan and ASEAN have forged a robust relationship by having mutual cooperation in the area of economic, political security, and social cultural recently, along with the development of Indo-Pacific narrative. Therefore, to discuss on how to advance cooperation between ASEAN and Japan in the context of free and open Indo-Pacific, we have 2 distinguished speakers. Firstly, I will invite Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar, but I will read the curriculum vitae briefly. Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar studies the worlds of academia, political activism, and government. She is a research professor at the Research Center for Politics, BRIN, and was the Deputy Chairman for Social Science and Humanities LIPI from 2001 until 2010. She was a distinguished visiting professor at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. She served as Deputy Secretary for Political Affairs and Deputy for Government Policy Support to Vice President Budiono and Vice President Muhammad Yusuf Kala, and many distinguished visiting scholar and professor in many institutions. She obtained her PhD from Monash University, Melbourne, and a master and bachelor from SOAS University of London. Allow me to welcome Bu Dewi to elaborate the topics for about 30 minutes. Bu Dewi, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pandu. Good day to Ambassador Chiba Akira. We miss you in the FPCI discussion because you had some internet problem, but I heard your questions. And Ken, it's nice to be back. Dr. Ken Jimbo, a good colleague. And first, I would like to thank the Mission of Japan for continuing this support to Indonesia in so many different forums. I'm also co-founder of FPCI, and now I'm also a research professor at the Research Center for Politics, and it is very heartening that Japan, the Mission of Japan in Jakarta, Mission of ASEAN, continues to have some confidence in us. I would like the organizer to share the screen for me, please. Assist in sharing the screen. Yes, I was we've given very broad brief. And people talk about ASEAN centrality all the time, but there have also been a lot of doubts about ASEAN centrality. So I feel the need to focus more about ASEAN centrality, the reasons, justifications for ASEAN centrality, and also cooperation with Japan. So if the sharing the screen, is it Sasa? Okay, so the title of my brief presentation is The Importance of ASEAN Centrality, for an open, transparent, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Now, I know the webinar is for realization of free and open Indo-Pacific. That is, the Japanese formula, but the ASEAN formula is for an open, transparent, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, which actually, is mutually reinforcing and not that different from each other. My presentation will be divided into 3 parts. First, I'd like to talk about the competitions in the Indo-Pacific, and then about the why and wherefore of the ASEAN centrality, and thirdly, about the ASEAN, the important role that Japan has played since the establishment of ASEAN. Next screen, please. Next slide, yeah. So this is just reiterating what has been said before. The Indo-Pacific region is a very dynamic region because it's marked by the presence of several competing major powers, as well as so many unresolved territorial disputes. We have the incumbent superpower, the United States, which has carried out a rebalancing policy towards Asia since President Obama. There's been ups and downs about that. We have an ascendant China with a comprehensive power, both economic and military might. And there's still questions whether, there's this opportunities or challenges or threats. Increasingly, there's been assertive policies by China in to assert its territorial claims in the maritime areas. And of course, Japan is a major economic power with global interests, and increasingly, Japan has become a much more normal power. It's not just an economic power anymore. India, as we know, is also a rising major power. It is not a nuclear power country in terms of NPT recognition, but it is a country that owns nuclear weapons, and its economy is becoming very, very robust as well. And as you know, that the primary theme in the Indo-Pacific region is the US-China rivalry. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah. And China, of course, has been, the country of interest. Every time we talk about Indo-Pacific, it is about what China is doing, how it is projecting its power, particularly its economic power, through the China's Belt and Road Initiative or Maritime Silk Road, with its massive infrastructure projects throughout Asia and eastern part of Africa. And many see this as China's global economic expansionism with some imperialistic undertone. China's ships are beginning to challenge the US and Indian Navy's Indian Ocean. And in Southeast Asia, as well as in South Asia, in Africa, China is beginning to overtake Japan as the largest foreign direct investor. And so there have been concerns among a lot of countries, not just welcoming China, but also concerns that the role of China, particularly its claims in the disputed maritime areas, have impacted on freedom of navigation and overflight, which lead to various strategies to counter China. As we know, the revitalization of Quad and the recent development of AUKUS. Next, please. Next slide, yeah. Very briefly, because this is only half an hour, for the concerns about rising competitions in Indo-Pacific regions among the major powers, of course, been of primary importance to ASEAN countries, because whenever big countries have conflicts in the region, Southeast Asia has been the primary theater for that competition. So ASEAN's, the raison d'etre behind ASEAN and ASEAN's desire to ensure its strategic autonomy, to ensure its centrality, its agency, has been very key to the ASEAN strategy in the Indo-Pacific region. ASEAN wishes to see itself, as the core layer in the Indo-Pacific regional architecture through this playing out of a role as the primary driver of various regional meetings. In the ASEAN Charter, in the purposes and principles, Article 1, paragraph 15 clearly says that ASEAN needs to maintain centrality and its proactive role as the primary driving force in its relations and cooperation with its external partners, in a regional architecture that is open, transparent, and inclusive. And so the key themes here is that ASEAN is in the driving seat for managing relations with external partners. Secondly, that ASEAN regional mechanism should be the primary regional conveners. And thirdly, that ASEAN needs to ensure an open, transparent, and inclusive regional architecture so that no one country can exclude the others. Next, please. Now, I think because there have been a lot of doubts recently being voiced about the viability of the ASEAN centrality, I think it is important also to reiterate again that within the Indo-Pacific region, there is really no wider regional architecture that is in existence before the various mechanisms created by ASEAN. As we know, there have been history of conflicts and mutual suspicions involving major regional powers, which makes it very difficult for major powers to take a lead. We can imagine if an regional architecture is led by China, it is unlikely to be supported by Japan and vice versa. And also, ASEAN's drive to play this central role since the mid-2000s, since the ASEAN Charter, is a realization that it cannot simply try to insulate itself from the wider strategic environment, because its strategic autonomy, regional peace and stability, and prosperity is very much closely linked to the wider strategic environment. So ASEAN could no longer be like in the earlier period, where it said, just keep out, leave us alone. We will just have Zopfan, and we will not make any demand on the outside except just do not bother us. Now, since the ASEAN Charter and this desire to play a bigger role in peace and stability in the region, there is this realizations of this connectivity between Southeast Asia and the wider external environment. And also, because there is a very strong commitment, strong faith among ASEAN countries of the importance of fostering dialogues to promote trust, to prevent conflicts and avoid external dominance. So, that's why ASEAN always, sees that it has to play a role. And ASEAN, of course, has well-established norms and values and principles in shaping regional code of conduct for managing intra-ASEAN and extra-ASEAN relations, and particularly through the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia. Next, please. Yeah. Still factors supporting ASEAN centrality. ASEAN has long established relations with several dialogue partners and forming ASEAN +1 relations. The ASEAN-Japan relation is one of the oldest, of course. So this fact makes ASEAN in a very good place to continue to play a more central role in the wider architecture. And ASEAN also is very determined to maintain its agency. It has always opposed wider regional architectures or initiatives by others that may sideline ASEAN. So ASEAN, in a way, is quite territorial here. Without ASEAN support, it would be very difficult for a wider regional architecture to be accepted. And remember when South Korea took the initiative, or when Australia took the initiative to form a wider regional architecture that is not centered on ASEAN, there's a lack of support from ASEAN countries. And because ASEAN is not seen as a threat by other countries, ASEAN central role is also more acceptable to other partners. And so ASEAN, I would argue, has also played like a role as a middle power regional organization in trying to develop this function as a facilitator, as mediator, as convener, and an agenda setter. Next, please. And now, following from that, ASEAN has played a central role in promoting regional cooperation. As I said, it's become the primary convener of various regional forums, which have contributed to enhancing understanding, peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. And it's been reiterated a number of times. For ASEAN, a regional architecture must be based on the principles of openness, transparency, inclusivity, with no single power or concert of powers exercising dominance. So this is the a term that's made popular under Foreign Minister Martin Natagawa about the ASEAN centrality and dynamic equilibrium between the major powers as being the most desirable means of maintaining wider, more sustainable regional peace and stability. And we have seen that the ASEAN-centric regional architecture has provided a multiplicity of both general and functional forums for all powers to promote dialogues for CBM, preventive diplomacy, as well as for economic development, cooperative security, and more direct functional cooperations and the economic and social cultural and so on. But the ultimate aim is really to promote peace, stability, and rule-based regional order. Next, please. Next slide, yeah. Geographically and in terms of regional architecture, ASEAN is at the heart of the Indo-Pacific region. At the earlier period, we talk about only Asia-Pacific, but with Indo-Pacific, it really makes ASEAN at the heart, straddling the region between the Indian Oceans and the Pacific Oceans. And one of the advantages for ASEAN is that most of the current institutional mechanisms in the region are being driven by ASEAN's processes. And we are very familiar with all of these existing institutions, which include, of course, ASEAN as the core, the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN Different Ministers Meetings Plus, expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum. We have ASEAN +3 and RCEP, which also is driven to a certain extent by ASEAN. And ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific that's been mentioned, launched in 2019, in fact, it's not a new regional initiative if you look at it, because what it does is to try to ensure ASEAN centrality amidst competing Indo-Pacific initiatives by insisting again on ASEAN centrality, that the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific reiterates the importance of existing regional mechanisms to promote cooperation here in 4 priority areas: maritime areas, connectivity, the economics, and SDGs. Now, it is very important also to reiterate that ASEAN centrality tries to promote regional and political security dialogues and cooperation, which stresses the principles of openness, transparency, and inclusiveness. The focus is on cooperative security that seeks common ground rather than collective security, which distinguishes friends from foes, low politics, and functional cooperation. But we know that there have been a lot of challenges to ASEAN centrality, both internal and external. ASEAN's great diversity among the member states, with very different political systems, strategic outlooks, and level of economic development, has continued to pose as a major challenge to ASEAN's cohesiveness and solidarity. And also, as ASEAN has varying capacity of chairmanship, it changes every year, and sometimes the chairmanship of ASEAN is less robust than at other times. And domestic crises also distract particular member states, reducing their ability to focus on regional issues. And of course, the Myanmar's military coup is a domestic crisis with regional dimensions. And ASEAN also has structural weaknesses in terms of the very weak institution, including the ASEAN Secretariat. It's still, it's not really vested with a lot of capacity. External threats, China's increasing economic dominance and assertive foreign policy have in fact challenged ASEAN's strategic autonomy. Several ASEAN member states have become very economically dependent, which make them more vulnerable to pressure not to act against Chinese interests, particularly in the South China Sea. And then what happened in Phnom Penh in 2012 about the failure of ASEAN to come to an agreement on a joint communique is a red letter day for ASEAN. Of course, intensifying US-China rivalry is again a major concern for ASEAN because again, Southeast Asia could become great power competition, proxy for great power competition that could again divide ASEAN. And of course, the emergence of unilateral initiatives outside ASEAN. This can be debated. Others, I would argue that the emergence of Quad and AUKUS do not necessarily challenge the centrality of ASEAN because they serve different purposes. Because ASEAN is again focused on cooperative security rather than collective security. Next, please. Now, very quickly, I would like to talk about the importance of Japan to ASEAN. It has been mentioned that we're entering into the fifth over 50 years of cooperation with Japan. Japan is one of the oldest dialogue partners of ASEAN, and in fact, I would argue that Japan is the single most important country, dialogue partner for ASEAN for a number of areas, at least in 4 areas. First, it is the role that Japan played, particularly during the times when Japan was the lead goose in the Flying Geese formation of the ASEAN, the Asian economic miracles emergence. The role of Japan in individual ASEAN countries is very, very important. It's critical. Then there is support for ASEAN itself. We've known through the histories of ASEAN how, in fact, very limited that ASEAN countries themselves invest in ASEAN Secretariat, and Japan has played a very important role in also helping to support the development of the ASEAN Secretariat. And of course, support for ASEAN cooperation in its different areas: political security cooperation, economic cooperation, and social cultural cooperation, particularly since the Fukuda Doctrine. But here I would like also to stress that ASEAN is also very limited in its ability to relate with each other, very limited communication between ASEAN countries, visits by ASEAN scholars to other ASEAN countries, for example. And Japan has played a very important role in facilitating intra-ASEAN community building through ASEAN youth, ASEAN ships, and so on. And in fact, in fact, this is in my earlier writings about development of ASEAN. There was a very important division of labor between the United States and Japan during the early days, particularly during the Cold War, as the US is the ultimate security guarantor, sheltering the non-communist ASEAN countries from the threats of communism, and Japan is a primary economic supporter of ASEAN. So and although there are many other players now in the region, particularly in the economic field, the role of Japan in ASEAN, I think, continues to be very, very critical. Next, please. And then, if we look at the studies, the survey carried out by the ISIS, the State of Southeast Asian Survey, there's the questions there. Looking at the conflict, the competition between China and the United States, are concerns that countries might have to choose between China and the United States, and if we are to have to choose a third party to hedge, which country do you trust most? And in 2020, Japan came top. The highest scores was for Japan at 38.2%, and EU came second at 31.2%. In 2021, Japan came second, but the numbers have risen at 39.3%, while EU is at 40.8%. So Japan is regarded as a very important partner, a trusted partner, not just for its economic role, but also trusted as a country that supports multilateralism and rules-based international, and also particularly because Japan is not a militaristic country. Its involvement outside of Japan, its military involvement outside Japan is only under the auspices of the United Nations. So Japan is again, is regarded as a trusted global player and regional partner. Conclusion? Yeah. So that I don't take too long. So we have seen that ASEAN centrality is derived from a combination of factors, the perceived gaps and needs for beyond ASEAN regional architecture, the ASEAN's ability to act as the primary regional convener, and also support from the dialogue partners. Without the support from the dialogue partners, ASEAN will not be able to carry out this role as a driver for regional activity mechanisms. ASEAN regional mechanisms have played an important role in fostering dialogues and cooperation to promote CBM, preventive diplomacy, and cooperative security. as well as, of course, to promote prosperity in the region. But ASEAN centrality faces many internal and external challenges that lead many to question its viability, particularly in the face of so many external challenges, major power competitions, and so on, which threatens to divide ASEAN as well. So in conclusion, the role and continuing support from Japan is very important for ASEAN in these 4 areas, both at the bilateral level and then at the institutional level, is supporting the institution of ASEAN itself, and then the various areas of ASEAN cooperation, as well as I hope that Japan also continues to assist ASEAN in its community building, because frankly speaking, ASEAN itself is still quite lacking in this area. I hope I have not gone on for too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Dewi. Actually, you have 7 minutes left. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now I kindly invite Professor Jimbo. Professor Jimbo is a professor from Faculty of Policy Management, Keio University, Senior Research Fellow, the Tokyo Foundation, Visiting Fellow, General NPO, research themes, study on policy simulation, security and international politics studies for resolution of new social issues, enhancing dissemination of Japan's views and information to other countries, and international networking, expertise. The first, international security, security in Asia-Pacific, Japan's foreign and security policy, and regionalism in East Asia. Allow me to welcome Professor Jimbo, PhD, to present the topics for about 30 minutes. Screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pragoya. Allow me to begin by thanking Mission of Japan to ASEAN, Ambassador Chiba. Very glad to see you online. And also the members of the BRIN, especially Dr. Nur Alami, for kindly offering the opening remark. And Dr. Devi, it's always nice to see you, and I'm very glad to partnering this event with you. So it's been too long, doing this events online, and I've been longing to be back to Jakarta to see you face to face. I always admire Indonesia's leadership roles and facilitating the ASEAN's initiatives, especially on the many important strategic agenda that the Southeast Asia has been facing. And I am personally very pleased and honored to be the member of the Indonesia 2040 project, and came up with some policy recommendation 2 or 3 years ago, where Indonesia is expected to become the 4th largest world economy by 2040. And particularly glad that many of those leaders who facilitated this project have been emphasizing a lot about Indonesia's growing global responsibility. And that is, I think, very encouraging for many of those G7 countries to see emerging powers to gain more global responsibility at this end. And especially for this year, Indonesia hosted G20 summit meeting in Bali this fall. And as Ambassador Chiba mentioned, that this is the particularly important period of time during the deteriorating situation in Ukraine. And obviously Russia is a part of G20. It might be a very sensitive and troublesome handling processes for Indonesian leadership, how you can really regard this G7 as a G20 as a venue to mitigate those tensions and also to rebuild the international order back in place. But I think everybody trusts Indonesia's handling this processes, and obviously Japan is the major partnering country to support this Indonesia's diplomatic initiatives as well. And as for the AOIP ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, I fully recognize that Indonesia has been the major facilitator to come up with a very important subject. As again, the Ambassador Chiba has mentioned very clearly that we are on the same track in sharing this platform of the Indo-Pacific concept. And I was very struck to hear that it is not about the ASEAN choosing the size, but it is the international community to choose whether ASEAN's initiative is a rigidly, moving forward processes. And I think this is a very important agenda to, the shared ownership of this concept, and how we can really build upon this concept to engage in the region and also outside, because the concept of the Indo-Pacific is already beyond, the geographical scope, whether you are inside the Indo-Pacific. But there are so many, countries, in the globe that adopting this Indo-Pacific concept as a platform to engage in the region. Look at Europe, look at the UK, Netherlands, France, Germany, and also the EU have all adopted the Indo-Pacific as the way to engage in the region. So I think it created huge gravity among us. And I think that one of the main actor to create such kind of a huge gravity is obviously the ASEAN has committed to this concept. So let me also share my screen to offer my basic points about what I am going to say about this deepening Japan-ASEAN cooperation. And I think Dr. Dewi has addressed many important concepts regarding the Indo-Pacific, and I don't want to spend too much time to overlap those aspects. But I think Indo-Pacific has become the major regional concept, especially since 2010s. And since, until then, there has been the rise and fall or the widening or deepening processes of the different regional concepts that we have been familiar with. In 1980s, we all talk about the Asia-Pacific with the rise of Asian economy, APEC and ASEAN Regional Forum as overriding the regional concept to engage the major players into this region. But in 1990s, when, especially after the aftermath of the Asian economic crisis in 1997, and obviously the Indonesia was one of the countries who suffered a lot from this crisis. But the fortunate news is that the East Asian country have found itself that could provide the platform of the political and economic solution to this crisis. So since the regularization of the summit and many of the ministerial meetings among those ASEAN 3 members, the initiatives like Chiang Mai initiatives to utilize the currency swap mechanisms to provide the stability to those financial markets have become the major assets and created stability and the resilience of the political economic affairs among those ASEAN plus 3 countries. And in 2000, we still remember the process of the creation of the East Asian Summit in 2005, where ASEAN took very important initiatives to engage external partners, including Australia, Indonesia, and India. So the ASEAN plus 3 also had the additional 3 members to become the formal launching members of the East Asian Summit in 2005. And we also recall the ASEAN's leadership in those processes, because the criteria of the signing of the TAC and being, the substantial relations with ASEAN, dialogue partner of the ASEAN, those three conditions have been the major, criteria for being the East Asian Summit. And everybody, rushed to sign on to it to become the formal member of the East Asian Summit. And what is make us most significant is in 2010s, East Asian Summit members have realized that there should be more like an institutional balancing act may be needed, because the rise of China is a major phenomena for everyone. And we have asked the United States and Russia to become the member of the East Asian Summit since 2011. So that was the process of the, deepening processes of how the region should be organized in terms of the institutionalization processes. And obviously that has backed up by the major strategic reasons why we try to engage those countries to play a major role in this region. And then Indo-Pacific comes in the mid 2010s as another defining concept that will try to lead us to the 2020s and beyond. And the origin of the Indo-Pacific, I think you can trace back to many, because there has been a scholarly debate, the think tank debate about the concept of the Indo-Pacific, why those concepts are becoming more important, which is, the additional geographical concept from the Asia-Pacific. And there are so many considerations because if you look at the economic global projection indicators, everybody understands how important those emerging economies might look like in 2020s and 30s. That involves Indonesia, obviously, and then the India, Pakistan, Egypt, East, West, Northeast African countries, and those are the potential for growth in the decades to come. We really need to proactively involve those emerging economies, not only to expand our economic and political profile to engage in the region, but I think that what we have come up with that we really need to set the rules of the order to play out in those regional newly emerging regional economies, and I think that has become the major motivation, and obviously that China has its own ideas to develop their own regional engagement processes through the Belt and Road initiatives in 2010s. So I think it was in 2016 when the Prime Minister Abe of Japan came up with formalization of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy in his speech in Africa in 2016 with involvement of the core geographical scope that is the Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean as the two oceans, and the Eurasian continents in Eastern Africa, two continents came up all together. So it's a massive geographical concept. But I think that who is in and who is out is not really the fundamental question. Anybody who can really plug and play into those free and open concept will become the major players in the Indo-Pacific. So I think everybody's searching for who has the copyright for the Indo-Pacific. But my scholarly answer to this question is that this Indo-Pacific concept can only be successful when everybody actually claims the copyright. So it is not the Japanese concept or the Donald Trump's concept or anybody else's concept, but it is everybody's concept because every nation has a different strategic scope and priorities. But I think that for those differentiation of those priorities, Indo-Pacific serves you as a major strategic concept. And I think we should embrace those different sets of the concept altogether for the promotion of the Indo-Pacific. So why the Indo-Pacific matters? And I think that has already been well described by the Dr. Dewi's presentation, so I don't want to overlap too much. But I think as a macroscope background is that we are in the very much heavy competitions along, around the globe, more symbolically by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But it's a continuation of the China's rise, which brings us both opportunities and also the strategic challenges. We also see the continued missile and nuclear developments by North Korea, and also return of the geopolitics in the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia's, and those kind of geostrategic competition have to be managed by the policy initiatives. And at the same time, there has been the expanding geoeconomics, especially what we see is the growing demand of the Indo-Pacific nations of the infrastructures for the coming years, and definitely they need to have a net kind of increase of the investment by external actors. And so those are, I think, particular conditions that why the Indo-Pacific is critically important. But at the same time, the upholding of this liberal international order, free market, and the rule of law have become a very important way that we want to realize for the future of this region. And in terms of Japan, I think that there has been, the concern from some ASEAN scholars and leaders expressing that, Japanese relations with especially vis-a-vis China have become too competitive. And there has been, I think, the growing concern by looking at Japan, that the Japan come to ASEAN and then ask ASEAN to take a size between China and Japan or the United States altogether. But I think what we have achieved, especially in the back in 2017, 18, 19, have been the process how we can really reconcile between the competitive strategy that we need to pursue vis-a-vis China, but at the same time that how much of those Chinese growth potentials of the market, technologies, innovations, and all should be, I think, utilized and engaged as a future potential for the region. And if China abides by the international roles and China takes the drastic domestic reforms of the economic policy and become more transparent and share those kind of future values with us, that's going to be a huge, I think, a potential opportunity for all of us. So I think that the way that Japan has engaged, especially since 2017 to 2020 onwards, was I think, the reconciliation of those competitive and cooperation strategy altogether. And I think that will provided a very important ground for how Japan and ASEAN try to promote the Indo-Pacific strategy altogether. Because I was glad to hear that many of those, the ASEAN leaders have been saying that there has been a more commonality between the concept that provided by the ASEAN and also the concept, promoted by the Japanese government. So there have been a lot of reason that the Japan and ASEAN can lead this concept altogether. But as a background, we also have to look at the security and defense components as the baseline of how we can really maintain the stability. As Japan is a major US ally in this region, and the continuation of this alliance and partnership relationship has become the platform of the Japanese security policy. And Dr. Dewi also mentioned about the Quad and the AUKUS processes. I heard the somewhat concerning voices from the Indonesia, especially over the AUKUS, Quad cooperation, as if that those initiatives may override the process of the ASEAN Security Cooperation initiatives, or they will try to ignore those ASEAN's ways to, to manage the potential conflicts in the region. But I was very glad to hear from the Dr. Devi that those can at least that coexist with each other, because everybody is looking at the different layers of the subjects altogether. And I think that those kind of security layers of the cooperation will seek to have a more convergence rather than the divergence of the interests between the two, because I think as Dr. Devi mentioned, that I think they have like different layers of the subjects that we are trying to deal with. And also maritime capacity building has become a very important subjects for especially the coastal nations of the ASEAN, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, all are quite conscious about the building up of the capability to become more resilient against those especially the Chinese maritime activities in the South China Sea and beyond. And with those that the Japan, Australia, United States, and all are quite in line with how you can really maintain the safety of the sea lanes of communication alongside of those ASEAN maritime domains. By looking at the geo-economic outreach, and obviously there has been a free trade and robust quality investments have been placed as a quite an important instrument for boosting the economic cooperation. Especially we are looking at the CPTPP as the major economic cooperation trade and investments scheme, especially of emphasizing on the rule-based economic order and the harmonization of the standards. Those are a very important platform to lead those other comprehensive economic framework to move it forward. So I'm glad to see that the UK is now applying in the processes, and I know that the Indonesia government has been quite keen in promoting this agenda. Tricky question we have is that China has raised the hand simultaneously with us, the Taiwan. This will create lots of political tensions over it, but if we can jointly use this process to pressure China to reform drastically inside the Chinese economic system, that could become a very important diplomatic leverage for creating the desirable economic order for the future. It's a sensitive subject, but I think it's worthwhile to try to utilize it as a very important opportunity. And again, our step, I was a bit disappointed that India went away from those processes, but very glad that the ASEAN plus 5 countries came up together with emergingly high quality trade and investment schemes altogether. Those institutionalization processes also, I think, accelerate what kind of economic order we should have for the Indo-Pacific region ahead of those, compiling economic cooperation scheme that will come in the near future. So I mentioned a lot about the major opportunities for Indo-Pacific, and I just to go through this remains to be a very important framework of the competition and cooperation in the 21st century. And also we utilize this Indo-Pacific concept for enhancing major power engagement and collaboration. Glad to see that every major nations are now using the Indo-Pacific to engage us. US, Australia, EU, all adopted the Indo-Pacific as a major concept that as I mentioned so far. And the future of the security and defense cooperation, there has been lots of, I think, the potentials to upgrade its security cooperation. And I think that the individual cooperation of the alliance and partnerships and also the multilateral cooperation on the maritime cooperation, and also build upon the existing process of the ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meeting Plus have become, I think, a major platform to make this convergent ideas altogether. So I think the way we can really converge the different sets of security cooperation initiative remain to be the very important subject for all of us. And also the geo-economic outreaches, as I mentioned, that free trade, investments, quality infrastructure cooperation, and also reliable financing mechanisms, and also the digital infrastructures, all important agenda for Japan and ASEAN to move it forward. So in my concluding remark, let me offer a few about what could be the important benchmark for Japan-ASEAN cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, and what could be the potential for the future. I was very glad to see that the Japan and ASEAN jointly came up with the joint statement, how we can really promote the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And I think things outlined in the outlook was quite a ambitious one. And I think that the Japanese FOIP and also the AOIP can jointly promote the cooperation, not only the items that we think is overlap together, but that there are so many potential for collaborating for other areas, because we share the platforms and we share the concept, and that can be also applied to many other subjects as well. But I think we have created the scheme, which we saying that we share the common views, and that we respect the ASEAN central and strategic roles in the region, and then we are going to detail what kind of cooperation could be made possible. And as Ambassador mentioned, that we have outlined the 4 areas of cooperation, namely the maritime cooperation, connectivity projects, SDGs, and also the economic cooperation. And building upon those 4 areas, I think we can actually make lots of additional cooperation altogether for the near future as well. And let me conclude by mentioning about what could be the potential cooperation areas for the future. Something I also would like to see is the Japan's and ASEAN's further determination to address the strategic competition in this region. The competition does not mean that we are going to, comprehensively compete against China or Russia or those, defining those countries as revisionist states, and we have to, compete shoulder to shoulder against those challenges, and those are one element, but I think it doesn't really represent the whole thing. I think that the major idea is how we can become more resilient players altogether, not only solely by us, but also with a cooperation with each other, because China is already a big player, and it's becoming a huge player in the future, and the gap of capability both on the economy and the military is on the rise. But if it is not only China that is growing in the Indo-Pacific, but also Indonesia, all the ASEAN other members, and India, and all those other members are also on the rise. And I think what we want to create is a kind of global portfolio for the partnership. If we can actually collaborate hand in hand, that will make us more resilient to the uncertain kind of the shocks and changes that potentially takes place in the strategic arena in the Indo-Pacific regions. And I think the first step that we need to do is the embracing the major power engagement in this region, that is the United States, because US has alliance with us, and also in Southeast Asia, especially in the Philippines and Thailand. And we would like to see those networking of those capabilities to be providing the common ground of the stability in this region, and also connecting with those the ASEAN security cooperation initiatives, as I mentioned, that the converging effects of the security cooperations are so important. And I also glad to hear that Dr. Devi mentioned about the dynamic equilibrium concept. I think it was a brilliant concept by the Indonesian government, that you try to have a strategic autonomy by its own self, because you have a capability on the economy and the military, diplomacy, bringing those assets all together to maintain the strategic autonomy, which actually creates more like autonomous status for the countries to collaborate with others. And then I think that those are a very important way to deal with the, for example, when China tried to expand its own military, maritime influence in the region, those kind of capability will create the flexible way to deterrent response. And if China tried to weigh a kind of economic statecraft against Southeast Asia, for example, with the investment restrictions or the trade bans or any kind of weaponization of the interdependence that might take place, those strategic autonomy also plays very important roles to make our supply chain more resilient. Sometimes with China, but sometimes without China. And those kind of autonomous flexibility could become, I think, a very important way to look at it. And finally, something that I wish to say at this moment is that I think Japan and ASEAN can provide somewhat the bridging kind of roles of or the closing of the divide in the world affairs. And obviously, we are the G7 members, by the way, and then U.S.-Japan alliance has become the major platform of our foreign policy. But when some country try to seek the coalition among the democracy, and let's have a democracy summit, or let's have a kind of a value-driven international order, we committed. I mean that we think it is very important, but there are so many countries who are in the transition status, somewhere in between the democratic processes vis-a-vis authoritarian rules. If we try to draw the line, in between the two, there will be lots of missed opportunity for how we can really engage in the emerging economies in the world. So I think Japan and ASEAN can create the kind of good governance, rule-based order, resiliences, and good interface to those areas. And then that will, I think, creates more, I think, comprehensive platform for any kind of actors in the Indo-Pacific can refer to what the Japan and ASEAN try to take initiatives of what kind of Indo-Pacific we are going to realize it. And I think it has a high potential that we can actually create the kind of role model for what kind of Indo-Pacific we want to realize for the future. So I think I spent 30 minutes, and thank you very much for giving the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jimbo, for giving such a fruitful material. All distinguished participants, now we come to question and answer session. Let me conclude some points. Professor Dewi highlighted a central role of ASEAN or ASEAN centrality, which is derived from a combination of factors, perceived gaps and needs for the ASEAN regional architecture, ASEAN's ability to act as the primary regional convener and support from the dialogue partners. ASEAN regional mechanism have played an important role, and ASEAN centrality face many internal and external challenges and continuing support from Japan. While Prof. Jimbo stressed potential cooperation areas for future, first addressing security cooperation such as defense capacity, supply chain resilience, and diplomacy. Second, bridging the gap and closing the divide in world affairs promotes good governance, a rule-based order, and enhance voice of Japan-ASEAN cooperation. I'd like to have 3 questions from the participants. I have already one question from the participant. This question for both speakers from Andy Hari Purwanto from BRIN. We know that the dispute over the claims of the South China Sea is very disturbing for several countries in the Indo-Pacific, including Indonesia and Japan. What strategic steps have been made between the Pacific and Indo-China countries in dealing with these geographical threats in achieving world peace? Maybe Bu Dewi first to answer.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we can see two kind of development in dealing with, first, the threat of China, and secondly, of managing conflict in the South China Sea. We know that overlapping territorial claims are going, especially if they involve several parties, unlikely to be resolved, because China claims the entirety of the South China Sea, while there are other claimants which claim only parts of the South China Sea. And so it's unlikely that there's going to be a final decision in the way that Indonesia and Malaysia was able to deal with Sipadan and Ligitan through the International Court of Justice, for example. So for Indonesia and the ASEAN countries, the most important thing is how to ensure that the potential for conflicts only remain potential, that they do not flare up. So the focus has always been on how to manage the conflicts and how to diffuse the conflicts through developments of the declaration of conduct of parties in the South China Sea and making a more binding code of conduct in the South China Sea. That has been the focus of ASEAN countries. But at the same time, we see the United States has focused more on ensuring freedom of navigation, or FONOP, and has ensuring that to show China that it will not, its military power should not be able to prevent freedom of navigation and of flight. So FONOPS has been the main strategy of the United States, and now FONOPS has been joined not just by United States, but the UK has also come in. Other European countries have come in, and AUKUS is, I think, is also aimed to ensure this. So you can see that there's a more militaristic focus by the United States and allies, while there's the collective security approach, or the balancing approach, you might say, while the ASEAN countries' approach have been much more this management of conflict through CBN, through preventive diplomacy, and hopefully the creation of a more binding code of conduct. Though they do not have an enforcement mechanism, there is an expectation in the way that the TAC has been able to ensure that ASEAN countries do not use force against each other. There is an expectation that parties in the South China Sea conflicts also desist from using conflict. And do they conflict with each other? On the one hand, this normative approach; on the other hand, this collective security approach. If we see the realities on the ground, they've always gone head to head. So while we think that, I personally believe that constructivism is important, we are also living in a realist world as well, where military powers also matter. So at the national level, countries also develop internal balancing, strengthening their own military capacity, including Indonesia, that does not really have claims in the South China Sea, except in the exclusive economic zones in the Natuna Sea. We see the efforts to change the name of the sea to North Natuna Sea, and the strengthening of our military capacity there, also the strengthening of the Coast Guard. So balancing, both internal balancing, and some countries have engaged in collective security, and this constructivist approach through developing a more binding code of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Dewi. Now, please, Prof. Jimbo, to answer.
Well, thank you very much. And I think Dr. Dewi has outlined this, how to deal with the South China Sea very eloquently. And if I may add a couple of others, other aspects. And I think from the Japanese perspective, the sea lanes of communications are deeply connected with each other. So there's no divide between East China Sea, South China Sea, Malacca Straits, all the way to Indian Ocean, because that the sea, those commercial sea lanes are the critically important for the transportation of the strategic goods like oil and also any kinds of those logistics that we have. So that is everybody's ground, and the safety of those sea lanes are critically important for all of us. And something that is going on in South China Sea, as we all aware, is the very disturbing, developments, especially by the reclamation of the artificial islands by China. And every year we see the development takes place involving the militarization of those islands by seeing the airstrips, ports, supporting mechanisms, and radars. And China has no hesitation right now to utilize those military, assets to be utilized as exercise and trainings. And obviously the militarization, in the words of the Dr. Dewi, have been taking place because we wish to play those international recognitions under the UNCLOS and freedom of navigation over flights could be fairly materialized in the South China Sea, and those kind of opportunity to demonstrate such kind of international law can be exercised in the South China Sea remains to be a very important, the practices to be continued for everyone. So I think those are still, creating concerns for those escalation, but at the same time, if we give up in not doing those demonstrations, I think that China will take those sides of the, their materialization of their governance in the South China Sea in its favor. And that is the huge strategic loss for everyone. So we really need to compete on this aspect. But at the same time that Japan and international community all expects the ASEAN's collective diplomatic roles to be play out in the South China Sea. So code of conduct remains to be a very important instrument. We wish to see that those high standards, rules to be materialized through the COC negotiation. Wish to see those legally binding processes in addition to the declaration of the conduct. It's already been done to create what kind of practices at the sea could be materialized for the all surface vessels, including the military vessels, have to abide by. And then those, I think, rule-based initiatives will create the more confidence over what kind of regional maritime order to be reflected, beginning from the South China Sea, but also it will be reflected to the other areas as well.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Jimbo, for your answer. And for your consideration, we let all the participants raise a hand to give a question to the both speakers. For next questions, we have from Arizal, Gajah Mada University. You will read the questions, or I will read the question. Oh, maybe, yeah. Let me read the question. It's addressed to Prof. Ken Jimbo. Prime Minister Kishida recently took a cover poster on Taiwan issue and China. Will it affect the security dimension of Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy in relation to ASEAN? Or will it continue to rely on geoeconomic outreach as suggested in AOIP joint statement. Prof. Jimbo?
Well, thank you very much. The question of Taiwan has been capturing attention for the strategic thinker in recent years because of many reasons. First of all, there has been the growing concerns over the growing Chinese capacity to change the status quo by force, with having more capability of the Air Force and amphibious capabilities, missile attacking capabilities, and as if that Chinese the way of engaging the military conflict and also those operations over Taiwan could be made possible in coming years, and those are the first concern. And the second concern that many have expressed is the political cycle in China. That this year is the major year for the Chinese Party Congress, where we expect that there will be the extension of the tenure of the President Xi Jinping to be a leader for next 5 or 10 years, and legitimization of his leadership is always been questions, especially in 2027. Where he can really, maintain the leadership without proving that Chinese integration, territorial integration processes will make the rigid result, and Taiwan comes into those questions as well. So I think everybody tried to see it as a real concern about the future of the stability of the Taiwan Straits. And with that, Japan and the United States, whenever the Prime Minister meet with President Biden, and then we also have a 2+2 meetings with the United States and Japan, they came up with a joint concern about addressing the Taiwan Straits issues, and we also try to upgrade it, the readiness between U.S. forces and Japanese self-defense force to deal with the highly escalatory situation for preparing for those scenarios as well. But at the same time, that whether we have changed the fundamental stance over China on the one China policy, that is not. It's been the main, I think, understanding since 1972 remains the same. And we also emphasize the peaceful diplomatic negotiation between mainland and also Taiwan could take place. But I think we also have to pursue those militarily hedging strategy to deal with the potential change of the status quo, and that requires our serious readiness to upgrade our security cooperation together. And I think that kind of concern is not only for Japan, but also for Southeast Asia and beyond. If something takes place in Taiwan Straits, that's going to be a massively disrupting. I mean, and that is a huge issue for the region as well. So maintaining the status quo by, I think, upgrading the deterrence and response capability is the very important task for all of us.
Okay, thank you. Next questions from my colleagues from Fauzan Farhana, BRIN, for both speakers. First, what kind of institutional strengthening is realistic for ASEAN to achieve its ASEAN's outlook on Indo-Pacific goals? Second, how is ASEAN progress in the realization of its AOIP so far from your point of view? Maybe Prof. Dewi will answer first.
Yeah. I mean, ASEAN could only play, as I say, its central role if ASEAN itself is strong and cohesive. Although we know that ASEAN has diversities in its political outlook and so on, the desire, the needs to strengthen the ASEAN institution is very, very important. And I've always been, in favor of a much more institutionalized ASEAN. So we are, really in the beginning, as you know, ASEAN was a very minimalist regional organization. The ASEAN Secretariat was not well funded and did not really have a strong mandate. And now ASEAN Secretariat has been empowered more, but it is still not very well resourced. Now, if you look at the EU, when it comes to political security cooperation, the focus remains at the governmental level. It's not taken over by Brussels. But when it comes to the more functional cooperation, the central body needs to be much more empowered. We might not want, ASEAN might not want to go, in the way that the EU, which is very bureaucratic, and which also led to Brexit. But more can be done to strengthen the capacity of the ASEAN Secretariat to assist ASEAN, particularly in the areas of functional cooperation. And if you look at the IOP, it is very much areas of functional cooperation, maritime, connectivity, SDGs, and economic. So strengthening the ASEAN Secretariat is very important. And then the decision-making process has also been criticized. On the economic field, of course, there's only a 10 minus X formula, but sometimes it's still very difficult for ASEAN to make decisions. So any way to make decision-making much more efficient is also important. And also to insulate ASEAN from crisis. It is a good thing that on this Myanmar crisis, ASEAN has been able to put the Myanmar issue aside and not to have ASEAN hosted to Myanmar. In the old days, during the 90s and early 2000s, ASEAN actually allowed itself to be held hostage in order to show solidarity to Myanmar, to protect Myanmar. A lot of ASEAN's relations with external partners, such as within ASEM, could not be carried out because the dialogue partners did not want to invite Myanmar, and ASEAN said, if Myanmar is not invited, we are not coming. Now, luckily now, I think ASEAN is much more sensible, and because what happened in Myanmar is not acceptable. ASEAN countries, particularly, Indonesia has taken the lead here, but also Malaysia and Singapore, saying that the junta top leadership will not be invited to ASEAN, and ASEAN cooperation continue to carry out. So how ASEAN protect itself from internal shocks and crises so that it should still be able to continue to function. That needs much more institutionalization than what ASEAN has at the moment. It is unavoidable that the quality of ASEAN chairmanship depends very much on the ability of each members to lead ASEAN. But I think that we also need here, if there's more institutionalization, that kind of varying leadership wouldn't matter so much.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. Prof. Jimbo, please.
Well, thank you very much. I thought that Dr. Dewi's proposals, perception over the role of ASEAN, I thought that was very brilliant. I recall that in 1998, when EU decided to take a more robust role in its own security cooperation out of this Franco-UK Saint-Malo summit, that was the aftermath of the Yugoslavian crisis, when many of the European states tried to engage diplomatically during the Yugoslavian crisis. They weren't come up with productive results, and NATO decided to bomb, former Yugoslavia, Serbia. That facilitated to the creating diplomatic grounds to ceasefire, and I thought that was a huge resentment by the many of the EU member states because things are happening in the backyard of the EU, but they weren't able to engage strategically on this issue, and those made them decide to have a more stronger EU and better security cooperation, that to create the strategic autonomy by all of them, because they now have alternative to engage, especially in a small and medium conflict by themselves. And I also refer to the future of the ASEAN. If they can come up with additional capability and solution. If something happened in South China Sea, in the maritime fronts, border disputes issue, and then ASEAN demonstrate the capability that they can actually solve those issues by themselves, it will create a better autonomy, because it won't be disturbed by the external intervention, and creating the more quota of the capacity to deal with one another. And Dr. Devi mentioned about Myanmar, and I think addressing the Myanmar issue by the ASEAN is, I think, a very important, I wouldn't say test case because it's too serious, but a very important way that how much that the ASEAN can handle this for the future of the the integration process of the ASEAN. So I would like to see those institutional development and the more capacity of the ASEAN, and I think external partners are really encouraging the ASEAN to address those issues by itself. And also for the institutional development, and I do not really believe that the Indo-Pacific will eventually organize any kind of Indo-Pacific organization type of thing at this moment, because the Indo-Pacific has been too huge. And I think, as I mentioned, there are so many different priorities are involved in this. So I guess East Asian Summit has already been, based on the Indo-Pacific geographical coverage. We also have to think about how to deal with Russia beginning of this year. But again, that has being the premier forum for Indo-Pacific cooperation that has been taking place already. And also, we'd like to see all the kind of new players who wish to be part of those Indo-Pacific concept, and those should be open-ended, because whoever abide by the rules, and also whoever compassionate about those future of the vision and rules to be materialized, and those are the major important part of the Indo-Pacific. So institutionalization is a good thing in terms of the making of the norms and rules to be addressed. But at the same time, we also have to be, quite widely open for newly incoming players to be part of the Indo-Pacific concept.
Okay. Thank you. I have seen hand raised, but it's no longer exists. Now let me take from our ASEAN citizen a question from Nguyen Tuan from Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, addressed to Professor Ken Jimbo. During the Cold War period, the Fukuda Doctrine had been a major Japan's foreign policy toward Southeast Asia, especially emphasizing heart-to-heart relationship. From view of Japanese scholar, what do you think about the role of the Fukuda Doctrine in the Japan-ASEAN cooperation, and how the doctrine linked to the recent Japan's foreign policy, especially under Prime Minister Kishida Fumio? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent question, and I think I have to write a couple of academic articles over your question. But I think 1977 Fukuda Doctrine remains to be the benchmark doctrine of the Japanese foreign policy towards Southeast Asia. And I read so many times again, and what has been the kind of, diplomatic backgrounds over crafting the Fukuda Doctrine. And I think the history matters, and I think Japan has been tried to be very careful in how we can really deal with Southeast Asia diplomatically, because the goodwill always doesn't really guarantee to be interpreted as a goodwill, because if expansion of the interest, using of the economic assistance, wouldn't really means that that will automatically ensures the good shape and forms of the Japan Southeast Asia relationship. But Fukuda came up with philosophy, I guess, and especially that has been iconed by heart-to-heart relationship. And what does it mean? And I think that is not really a kind of hierarchical relationship, even though we provide ODA, that is not the donor recipient relationship, and that is mutual. That is for mutual benefits and mutual kind of interest between the two, because Japan has been in favor of the ASEAN's good governance and the resiliency, and those good governance and resiliency, compilation of those processes eventually become a very strategic, very much a strategic interest of the Japan itself. So we are actually doing this not only for ASEAN, but also for Japan. Those are, I think, a mutually recognized, equal status relationship between the two. And I think those are very important aspects in dealing with the Japan-ASEAN relationship. And I think it remains to be the fundamental kind of, posture of how we deal with ASEAN. And sometimes I talk with government officials, and my humble advice to them is that, ASEAN leaders will become very cautious if Japan try to tell ASEAN what to do, right? And this is the 3 recommendations what Japan wish ASEAN to do, this and that. And that is not the way I think a Japanese government should engage ASEAN. And I think that, both of us have a interest, but look at their interests outlined by the ASEAN official documents and many of those arguments. And if that overlap with what Japan wish to do it together, let's engage in those ASEAN proposal to become the joint proposal between Japan and ASEAN. And then that the ASEAN will look to us. And then Japanese, many of those, the national security strategy or many of the items to be taken note by the ASEAN leaders as well. So respect both sides' initiatives and bring them into the joint project altogether. So look at what we have done in 2020 over AOIP. We, actually went through all together and then to find the commonality and the overlapping kind of subject with each other. And those are like a kind of pressing way of, finding those commonality between the two sides. And I think that is the most effective way that the Japan and ASEAN can collaborate for the future agenda. So I think that is also the remaining concept and enduring concept for the Kishida administration as well.
Thank you. I think the last question from Lucia is addressed to Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Does U.S. hesitant attitude in Russia-Ukraine conflict pose anxiety in Tokyo? U.S. or United States seems to distance itself in the Russia-Ukraine conflict by only posing sanctions as well as limited troops presence. Zelensky now furious and reported as feeling betrayed by the many false promises. Will this make Japan arming itself in the event that US will behave similarly in the event of similar conflict occurring in Japan? Bu Dewi, please.
Well, I think Professor Ken Jimbo is the one that should really answer this, and I think that's precisely why there's a difference. Russia preempted Ukraine from joining NATO, because if Ukraine had joined NATO, then NATO will be obliged to come to the physical assistance, military assistance of Ukraine, but because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, NATO countries will not be they are not obliged, and I think they will be very reluctant to get engaged in direct military conflicts. And here, we do not wish the United States to go to head-to-head conflict with Russia, two nuclear powers, that could lead to world war. So our hope is that you may disagree with sanctions and so on, but economic sanctions are expected, to hurt, and it will take time. But hopefully, the elites of Russia will feel this hurt, so that they will also question their government, about the sustainability of continuing Russia's aggressions against Ukraine. That's in it. But the whole point is that Japan has a military alliance with the United States. Professor Kenji would talk about the importance of the alliance between Japan and the United States. This is not only to protect Japan from possible hostile acts, whether it's from Russia, from China, or from North Korea, but at the same time, to prevent Japan from becoming again a military power. We will all tremble if Japan feels the need to become rogue, to develop its own nuclear weapons, which of course Japan will never do. But if it were to change its constitution, it will also change, about the nature of Japanese military. It would also change the image of Japan to the region. Japan will not only be seen as a trusted partner anymore. There will also be concerns about Japan. There'll be concerns in Korea. North and South Koreas don't like each other, but they're all united in their hostility towards Japan, suspicions of Japan. China and Taiwan have problems, but they will be united in their oppositions to Japan. And we know that within Southeast Asian countries too. Even remember when Japan first took an active part in international peacekeeping force. Indonesia supported it, but Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew said, it was like giving chocolate liquor to a reformed alcoholic. So the history matters here too. So hopefully the strength of the US-Japan alliance will also protect Japan. The nuclear umbrella will protect Japan, but also will prevent Japan from rearming itself. But I think that Professor Ken Jimbo is the best one to answer this.
Thank you, Dewi. Maybe both speakers are concerning about balancing distribution of power, while me as moderator balancing distribution of questions. All right. Before we closing, maybe we'll invite Mr. Professor Jimbo to give some closing statement, and after that, maybe we'll do it. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much. To answer the last question, I guess that the Russian invasion in Ukraine certainly is great strategic shock for not only for the European security, but also that spill over to the other regions as well. And what we see obviously is the major coalition among the NATO members, like-minded states, to fully going against Russian invasions. Created the coalition among the European states. Even gave more open door to the NATO membership to not Ukraine, but all the other potential states, including the EU accession processes as well. And those are going certainly beyond President Putin's intention, make the European cooperation even more rigid than pre-invasion. Economic sanction has been placed unequivocally and at the great scale, and those are the messaging to the leadership in Moscow that such kind of barbaric action cannot really complete it without such a huge cost. And those are, I think, an important way is to still go ongoing for the international community to make a conclusion that the Putin had made a strategic mistake and with huge consequences. And we've got to have that kind of result in the months to come. And so this is still a struggling process. But if we fail in materializing this, and that's going to be a bad lessons for every kind of potential aggressor in the future. So we've got to make it successful in making Putin's decision to be a huge strategic failure. And the things that the question that I receive is whether that will concern Japanese future, security kind of consideration with the United States. And I think United States engagement in Asia is very firm, and we have kind of strong confidence that the alliance is functioning for the deterrence and defense. But at the same time, one can wonder that it's really up to the U.S. Political decisions to fight against the aggressors, even under the nuclear threats. Many mentioned that we want to avoid the Third World War under the shadow of the nuclear, escalation. But China is a strong country with conventional weapons and the nuclear weapons altogether. And they certainly learned the lessons from how they fought the war in Ukraine. And the role of the nuclear weapons will become more salient in any case that we face for the future conflict. We wish that those kind of situation can also be manageable, and especially in dealing with the conflict solving phase in the alliance management. And we've got to prepare for this. So this is a matter of the preparedness for the future. And also for the final remarks, and I think I may be repeating myself, but again, the Indo-Pacific is, I still believe it is the promising concept for the future. But the future is designed by ourselves. And especially in the Japan-ASEAN leg of cooperation can become an important platform because as a natural role of the ASEAN, everybody can really play out the diplomacy platform by the ASEAN initiatives. And I think not only Japan, but China, Korea, United States all appreciate the ASEAN's convening roles to engage the major power into the space of the ASEAN's diplomatic community. This is a very fortunate asset for everyone, because if Japan only takes the leadership and Korea, China may say, oh, no, and China do the same for us. But if ASEAN takes the leadership, that is really providing the comfortable ground for everyone. And this is, I believe, the very important strategic asset for this region. And for that, I really expect that there will be a more further upgrade of the Japan-ASEAN cooperation to promote the Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will kindly invite Prof. Dewi for a closing statement, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, what happens in Europe, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a shock to our system, and also has to be a cautionary tale for us that peace cannot be taken for granted. So therefore, if we want peace and stability, we have to work at it. And here the role of dialogues, the whole of confidence building measures, preventive diplomacies, having functional linkages, strengthening economic cooperation remain very, very important. And here the role of ASEAN, the vision of ASEAN as as I say, a middle power regional organizations that is acceptable to everyone and that is able to come up with good ideas and able to host good parties in which everybody feels welcome remains very, very important. But in order for ASEAN to exercise this agency, this centrality, ASEAN should also really keep its own house in order, strengthening the ASEAN community building in all 3 pillars, strengthening the institutions of ASEAN, really working hard to develop common values in line with the ASEAN Charter. It's very, very important for ASEAN. So without the strengthening of the inner core, it would be very difficult. If ASEAN itself hollows out, it will not be able to play the driving seat position in the Indo-Pacific. At the end of the day, when we're talking about Indo-Pacific, I think that this concentric circles formula remain important. So ASEAN is the inner circle, has to really strengthen itself, and then working together with trusted dialogue partners and who has proven, has a track record of working very closely with ASEAN. And here Japan is a very trusted dialogue partner, not least in also assisting ASEAN in this community building project. So not just in managing, in helping to strengthen ASEAN's role in managing relations with external powers, but also in strengthening ASEAN entity itself, whether at the country level or at the regional level. Including in promoting, again, connectivity, people's connectivity within ASEAN. Japan has been the only one that has played that role in the past. And I hope, that in the future, ASEAN and Japan will again focus a lot of attention in promoting this ASEAN-Japan people-to-people connectivity through various exchanges, youth, scholars, and so on, because that actually will create a lot of capital, social capital also for Japan to play a role in other areas with ASEAN. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end of part of this discussion. I would not take any conclusion from what the speakers have presented. Please consider all the participants to fill in the questionnaire. I'd like to thank so much to the speakers, distinguished speaker, for your information and interesting presentation, and to the participant for very active participation. I extend my gratitude to all steering committee from PRP-BRIN and Misson of Japan. Hopefully, the webinar will be beneficial for everybody. Back to you, Mbak Lydia. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon.
Okay, Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Pandu. To officially close today's event, we are going to have the closing remarks by the head of International Studies Cluster, the Research Center for Politics, the Institute of Social Science and Humanities, National Research and Innovation Agency, Dr. Emilia Justiningrum. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Lydia. Ambassador Chiba Akira, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, Professor Ken Jimbo, Dr. Atikah Nur Alami, and ladies and gentlemen who attended the webinar. From the seminar, we recognize that there are two different ways of seeing Indo-Pacific. First, ASEAN by utilizing ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, and second, Japan by using free and open Indo-Pacific. But how does the two different approaches work together? First, ASEAN more developing inclusive approach by utilizing ASEAN centrality, which is Japan use a containment strategy against China, shifting the security policy into economic idea, but try not to distance herself from securitizing the relation with China, despite the acknowledging China's growing foreign policy ambition in the region. But however, toward ASEAN, Japan is an important partner, not only for economic role, but also supporting multilateral role by ASEAN in the region. ASEAN is a regional organization, try to keep the approach by managing the conflict and also diffusing the conflict, as long as trying as hard as it can not to make the tension or the conflict into an open war in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, as a closing statement, I would say that I close this webinar in the name of Research Center for Politics and National Research and Innovation Agency. I would like to say thank you for Ambassador Chiba, Professor Ken Jimbo, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, Dr. Atikah Nur Alami. It has been a fruitful discussion and a lot of sharing information for all of us. Thank you. And I return the screen to Master of Ceremony. Lydia, please.
Thank you very much, Mbak Emilia. Ladies and gentlemen, we have accomplished all programs on today's webinar, Deepening Cooperation with ASEAN Toward the Realization of a Free and Open Indo-Pacific. I would like to formally close our today's webinar. Our heartfelt thanks goes to Mission of Japan to ASEAN. We do expect that we will have more cooperation in the future. And last but not least, we thank every participant for joining us on today's webinar. Before leaving the Zoom meeting, we inform you that the digital certificate for participant will be delivered only to those who fill the questionnaire. The questionnaire link is available on the chat box, and the certificate will be sent to your registered email. Once again, thank you very much, and see you in the next event. Good afternoon.